This podcast is sponsored by Release Winery. Every wine tells a story. Each growing season, it's our goal to create an artisan Napa Valley wine of exceptional quality. Join us as the story of this ultra-limited wine continues. Learn more at releasewinery.com.
This estate is pretty much steeped in history as being the second commercial vineyard that's the oldest in Napa Valley. Charles Krug was the first. This was established in 1863 by Henry Pellet, one of the true pioneers of Napa Valley. He was one of St. Helena's first mayors. He was one of the founding members of Appellation St. Helena, which was back then known as the St. Helena Viticulture Society. He was a sitting member and founding member of the California Wine Commission in Sacramento, in our state capital. It's just amazing what the gentleman had done, along with his neighbors, Dr. Charles Crane, which is the next vineyard over, Charles Krug, H.W. Crabb, who founded Tokelon. Those guys really put Napa Valley back on the map in 1875 with the formation of Appellation St. Helena. And it's just Cabernet Central here. And Henry Pellet actually went over to Europe and brought back about 60 different rootstocks and varietals to experiment on his neighbor Dr. Crane's land, where he actually was farming Dr. Crane's land for him, taking care of his vines, and making his wine. At one time, Henry Pellet cellar here was considered one of the most finest examples of California cellars, producing over 80,000 gallons. He later went on to form Pellet and Carver Winery here that lasted until about 1890 or so, and then he finally passed away in 1912. The property basically was just producing grapes, and it was being sold. Over the years, went fallow during Prohibition, and in 2010, I worked with the owners to reestablish this winery here, bring its former glory back to life, replanted the rows in 2005, and here we are today and celebrating our 10th harvest. I think it would have really ratcheted up a lot more quickly with that little pause there. It put us behind Europe a lot. French wines, were really dominant, when I was growing up in St. Louis area, and California wine still was non-existent in the Midwest radar from when I was a young child. And from my parents, my grandfather actually was importing a lot of European wines from both Austria, France, and Germany all throughout my father's childhood, and that's what we learned, to appreciate, as children growing up. And it wasn't really until the 80s, in the late 70s and 80s, that we kind of rediscovered California wines, and I think it really set us behind. No, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri originally, and grew up there, born and raised there, and grew up in doing the family construction business there, but was always involved in food and wine. My parents would go over to Europe back in the early and mid-late 70s, and they would take cooking classes all over Europe, and then they would bring back up-and-coming rising chefs to stay with us for a week while they gave cooking classes downtown in St. Louis. And so it was just a food extravaganza. Learned how to cook, classical French, Provençal French, Viennese cooking, Florentine cooking. So we're always making pasta. Food and wine has been an integral part of my life ever since I was old enough to walk. Well, I came out to California in 1985 and was attending University of San Francisco, and I needed a job to pay for extracurricular activities, so I actually began a career in the digital processing section for Northern California for Wells Fargo Bank, and so I worked the midnight shift, and I really got into computers and all the big mainframe processing, and the computer and IT. All that technology really fascinated me, and so then I switched into information systems management program at USF, then left Wells Fargo, worked for a couple more companies and did some consulting with Apple Computer, Claire's Corporation, way back in the day, and then I decided I would branch out onto my own and formed a company called Grapevine Software Corporation, and I named it Grapevine Software after my love and passion for wine, because my end goal was always to come up and basically build and run a winery. And sold that and wound that down in the early 2000s during the tech crash, and actually moved up here and reinvented myself again as what I am today. My father was very ambitious about his collection, and so he would buy diverse amounts of Bordeaux, and we'd always be having tastings or parties over and pairing that with men's cooking groups. His cooking group was called Der Feinschmeckers, and it was all his male buddies, and they would get together about every 4 months or so at one person's house, and they would cook all day, and then they go home, clean up, then the wives would come, we'd have dinner, and I was the busboy, the wine steward, and the dishwasher crew.